you could feel the pressure. It's like, okay, I'm getting out. What do I want to do? Like, I didn't really know what that looked like. And that is such a common thing for folks in transition. No matter what stage of life you are, is like, what do I want to do next? Do I want to continue on with what I'm doing? Or do I want to take a complete sea change and take on a different career? And just by happenstance, I kept running into these two other Marines who had already retired, but were still, they were still working on their transition. And we just naturally started congregating. And when we would see each other at these events, we would always end up at the same conversation point. Like, how do we network? Like, what does this look like? This is so frustrating. We have all of these great American patriots on the outside who want to help us, but they have no idea how to help us. And the lack of enthusiasm is not our problem. Like, there are so many people who want to do so many great things for vets and, really want to be on the front end. And so we're like, number one, finding networking events is like impossible. We're like, well, we're going to start networking events. So next time we meet, everybody bring a friend. 5 months into it, we showed up. And so kind of our little concept was Kevin Cortez, Phil Kendrow, and myself. I'll never forget, Kevin's like, hey, I've got a membership to the university club down in the city. And he's like, let's all have lunch and let's kind of talk through this. And we were like, okay, we kind of came up with the concept of like, hey, there's 140 some odd craft breweries in San Diego. Veterans need a place to meet. Veterans like beer. Beer's fun and relaxing, and we just want a chill networking environment.
But it's not a drinking group.
It's not a drinking club. And these are all things that we had just talked about. Well, it wasn't until about the fifth month, by the law of exponents, we walked into AleSmith on Miramar Road, and we've got eyeballs staring back at us, 50 of them, 50 sets.
I do appreciate the beers.
Oh yeah, my pleasure. My pleasure.
I actually just read something yesterday that said for the first time, and I want to say maybe a decade, maybe a little bit longer, the craft brewing industry first saw their decline in sales last year.
Yes.
Is that true? Are you guys experiencing that?
No, not really. Actually, we have done very well. And there's a whole story as how I got involved with that specific brewery and, just through networking and connections and those kind of things. But to answer your question, no, we're actually doing great. And actually, we really took off during COVID, mainly because we were about 96% canning, whereas most breweries have like a 70% canning, 30% kegging split. Well, we hadn't gotten to that point yet, and we had already pre-bought all of our cans for about a year. So I don't know if you remember, there was a canning crisis.
Yes.
Our canning shortage. Crisis is very hyperbolic, but there was a shortage. And what you were seeing is when the restaurants were shutting down, not ordering the kegs, a lot of craft breweries couldn't retool their machining lines fast enough, nor did they have the supply. Whereas we were just like, we're great. We just kept pumping out. We actually started gaining market share because of that. And then, we started competing in the beer competitions, which, who knows how those work. But when you start going head to head against companies or breweries like Stone, our Hazy had beaten theirs a couple years running in the international beer competition. So you've really made it when Costco starts coming out and saying, hey, we'd like to get you on the shelf. But there's that Costco conundrum whereby if you sign a contract with them, you have to deliver. And so we had to do responsible growth. So we were able to start supplying Costco's in LA. And then because of the nuances of however it works here in San Diego, we were a little bit behind here, but then we started getting them into the Costco's here. But of course, you're going to have your demographics in your pockets where this Costco is really hot, this one maybe not, and it all just depends, and you just kind of feel it out. But the key is not going all in. It's really just slow and methodical and adding vats and adding all the processing. But that's all on Sean Haggerty, who's the owner and master brewer there. I got involved.
You're just the independent taster?
Well, no. He wanted investors. Was doing friends and family, but also kind of wanted access to my Rolodex, which is great. Because what American doesn't want to own like a piece of a brewery,
right.
And I just thought it was a novel thing. We're all looking for
beer's just a passing fad in this country. It's not going to stick.
Well, it's one of those things whereby, through a friend of a friend, where you're just talking like, gosh, it'd be great to like own a brewery or be a brewer. And he remembered that. And we were at a gathering and he's like, hey, I want you to meet this guy. Yes, it's a craft brewery, but hear him out. And I was really skeptical. I'm like, oh, gosh, it's one thing to talk about it. Like it briefs well on the slide, but then how is it in practice? And he's like, just come over to the brewery on Tuesday. And I'm like, well, I've got a friend who's going to open, who was also opening up some storefronts. It was he has a sushi franchise. And I'm like, if Kevin and I can come and taste, I'm like, we'll give it a shot. What the heck? So I call up my buddy Kevin and we show up and, it was after hours. So he was cleaning vats and, and doing all of his chemistry stuff and, puts 2 beers in front of us. And as soon as Kevin tasted, he's like, I want that in all my places. And as soon as I taste it, I'm like, all right, where do I sign?
Very cool.
Like we're in. And it's been a great ride ever since. I wanted to be, because we all have our investment portfolios and things we do, but I wanted some local investments where number one, there was an educational end of it. There was some philanthropy involved. He's very giving. Sean and the entire brewery team at Protector is very giving. And, I wanted to be like a silent partner who kind of like the Norm from Cheers, where you walk in, everybody's like, hey, and you can bring friends. And again, there's that heavy community aspect to it, which is to me is so important in every aspect of our lives, is to have those communities where you go to that, it fills up your cup emotionally,
right.
So yeah, that's kind of that with Protector.
We'll definitely get into a lot more of that.
Sure.
So the normal pathway. Let's go way back.
Okay.
Young man, where did you grow up?
Okay. So was born in North Miami Beach. My family are all originally from St. Louis, and then they all migrated down to Florida. My grandparents moved down from St. Louis.
Kind of a retirement thing, or?
No, this is actually in the 70s. So, Florida was still raw and, very underdeveloped, if you will, compared to today, which is like, it's like a city state,
right.
It's just one city, long sprawl. So moved there. I was born in North Miami Beach, Florida. And my mom was a nurse. My dad's a teacher. And was born in North Miami Beach and then moved to Fort Lauderdale to a suburb called Margate. It's in Broward County. So in the southern part of the state, but that's kind of like southern central, if you will. So grew up there.
Close to the beach in that city?
About 20 minutes from there. So my dad actually taught at Fort Lauderdale High School. And for those who remember the movie Porky's, that's what the high school, the story was based on that school. So that's kind of one of the running jokes, the Fort Lauderdale Flying L's. And so along with being a teacher, my dad was a high school football coach for years and years and years. So yeah, that was kind of like the start with my parents.
What about the extended family? Brothers, sisters?
I have 2 younger brothers, no sisters, aunts, uncles, kind of all over the country. But there's, one common string with my family is, my dad played college football. My uncles played college football. He was a high school coach. So, baseball and football were a very big part of my upbringing. Initially it was just baseball. My dad wouldn't let me play Pop Warner football. And, it was a very angsty I couldn't understand until I got to high school. And there was a reason why he didn't let me play like Pop Warner football, and I could play as much baseball as possible. a lot of, just development and growth. And
I was going to say, from his experience playing and coaching, was he just holding you back just for the physical development aspect?
Yeah, like I couldn't lift weights until I was 13, but as soon as I was 13, I was in the weight room, even though there's nothing more humbling than, being a 13-year-old kid and get in there and get on the bench and you can only put the bar up. And you're like, oh, and it's like, man, I got to get 5s on there at least. So, there's something to be said about eating humble pie really early in life.
Was baseball, as far as the two sports, was it, okay, fine, I'll play baseball because that's all I'm allowed to play, and football was where you wanted to go? Or was your heart more into baseball?
That's a really good question. Funny story with that. Like, my folks really didn't have any intention with me playing sports while I was young. I had a neighbor across the street, Mac Cruz, and his son Jason. And Mac was he was a Florida Gator grad, took me to my first college football game when Emmitt Smith was playing. But it was early on. We were like 5 or 6 years old with T-ball. And I was sitting out in front of my house one day, and, Mr. Mac is what I called him, had the tee, and my buddy Jason was hitting the ball, trying to get it over the fence by his house, just kind of give him some, kind of like hit the ball over the fence. And I was watching, and Mr. Mac saw me across the street, and he's like, "Hey, Brian, you want to come over and try this?" I was like, "Oh, I'd love to. I would love to." And so behind the fence, they had the pool. And in Florida, you have those gated pool areas.
Kind of like the sunscreens over them?
Exactly. So he puts the ball on the tee, and I whacked it over the fence, over the screen. He's like, "Do that again." He put a couple times. He's like, "Come here, boy." So he walks me across the street, knocks on my door. Mom opens, and Mr. Mac's like, "I want him on my baseball team." So thanks to Mr. Mac, I started playing baseball. I was like 5, 6 years old, and, played it all through elementary, middle, and then fortunate enough to make the high school team. And, by the time I got to my senior year, I had some decisions to make whether I wanted to play baseball or football.
So you didn't start playing football in your freshman year?
Until high school. So when freshman year kicked off, I was all of 5'10", 155 pounds, looked like a human Q-tip, had like hair.
Linebacker potential.
Oh gosh, I was gangly, I looked like Ponch from Chips. And, first game was against one of the most prolific high schools in the state of Florida. As a freshman, it was JV ball. Ended up getting called in the middle of the third quarter because of lightning and thunder, and so football games do get called, but I'll never forget that we just got crushed. And as a 155-pound guard, it was just awful. Great learning experience though. But then, just through growing and lifting weights and, bigger, faster, stronger kind of things. But as I got older, I understood why my dad didn't let me play Pop Warner football. And his theory was, by the time sophomore year rolls around, a lot of those kids end up dropping off. They're just beat up. And then it all started making sense to me, so.
I have some close friends who are avid baseball players, and in the area, kind of where I grew up, is known for baseball. Mm-hmm. And several of them told me the kids that from a very young age, just year-round baseball, especially pitchers, by the time they get to high school, they're literally they're thrown out per se. Their arm is just toast. Yeah. And so it's that thing of building in the desire and the want to improve and play, but yet pulling the reins back and as a parent kind of letting out a little bit as they get older, so that when they're done with high school, there's still some mileage left on their bodies.
Yeah, there's a very memorable story on that note. When I was going through high school, there's a fella who played for a team across town, pitched him all the way to the state semifinals, got drafted by the Pittsburgh Pirates, was prolific, like completely dominating one of the top prospects in the country. Got to lower A ball, blew his arm out because just the overuse to that point. But a good news story on that is one of my close buddies, I'll say his name, Rob Cancel, was one of those guys who was always he barely made the JV team and barely made the varsity team. If I remember correctly, he didn't make it freshman year. Really, really lean, thin guy, hit a growth spurt, and by our senior year was one of the most dominant pitchers in the state of Florida. but to your point, had not had overuse, but just worked really, really hard, really, really bright fella. Just one of those consummate team players that everybody loves to be around and, have on the team. And then he ended up dominating. And it was just like, such an easy guy to cheer for.
So what were the years you were in high school?
So I graduated in 91. So 87 to 91 would have been the time frame.
So for your experience growing up, because I've got about a decade on you. And so like when I was a kid growing up, 12, 13 years old, the idea of playing one sport year round wasn't the norm.
No, not
you
at all.
Bounced sport.
Yeah.
It wasn't until probably I would say the late 80s, early 90s that I started hearing my friends talking about their kids playing year round.
Yeah, that was absolutely not happening in my house. We had, by the time I got to high school, it was football season and baseball season. But, again, my parents were incredible parents of kids under their roof, but my mom was a nurse. My dad was a teacher. We didn't have that kind of money to pay for like travel ball or year-round sports. And, my parents were working their tails off. So I learned those values real early on about hard work and, but they always made time to be there for my events. So kind of bringing it all the way back around, by the time I got into high school, it was football season. And then my dad made me take a break to lift weights. And then there was baseball season. Then you'd have spring football. And then, more lifting, refresh in the summer. Now, where it got interesting is by the time my senior year rolled around, I was starting to get good enough where I made the American Legion team, which in Florida at the time, American Legion was the alternative to travel baseball.
Got it.
Big deal, and I was really proud of that fact that I was capable enough to make that American Legion team for our community, which also now, when you carry it over.
Is American Legion kind of like Pony League, or is it even a step up from that?
Oh, well, it's high school.
Oh, okay.
It's high school. It's an organized high school league put on by the American Legion across the country. It's a massive league. And there's also a storyline with American Legion from my high school experience to right now in my life as well. So I specifically highlight that. But to the question, my dad made sure I had breaks, and he wanted to make sure that I had recovery time. Did not want to have overuse injuries, because that was his whole point with Pop Warner football, is all these kids would have all these overuse injuries. And even at that time, he might have been even ahead of his time with his thinking on that kind of stuff, where he's like, look, my dad was a very well-read man, very, very bright, and he could see that. And on top of that, my mom too, as a nurse, so the two of them were completely in sync on that. And it had actually worked out, because, at the end of the line by my senior year, I was getting looked at by Division I schools for the opportunity to play in college.
Both sports or
I was. So baseball kind of came on the tail end of that, because my senior year we were picked to finish eighth in our league. We ended up going all the way to the state semifinals in Florida for baseball. So you start getting notoriety and you start getting noticed. So I started getting recruited, but it was really for football. My sophomore year in high school, one of the most memorable events that ever happened in my life was my folks sat me down after spring football my sophomore year, and they're like, look, we can't afford to send you to college. But my dad, he's like, but I think you might have the ability to earn a scholarship. He's like, so rather than us telling you you're going to get a job and work for the summers, your job is the weight room. Your job is your studies. Your job is to, anytime we ask you to do anything around the house, you will take care of it. So that was a trade-off. And they're like, and he said, I think you can make that happen, because, you got your two brothers, where we are in life. And that was hugely impactful for me. But rather than curling up in a ball, and saying, oh my gosh, like, this is terrible. Like, I was again fortunate enough to have parents that held me accountable, and they're like, "Go, we believe in you. Go."
What was your relationship like with your dad? Because we've all gone through that period of, as you grow up as a kid. Oh, my dad, and you kind of, some kids worse, some kids not as bad, but you kind of butt heads. Did you find that your dad's guidance you took very easily, or did you guys kind of have your moments where maybe you felt like, I could do this better if I make my own decisions?
Well, that's a really funny, that's a fun little sidebar question. You know, my dad was a person of not many words. My mom, on the other hand, was, you know, if I have any shred of a sense of humor, it's because of my mom. You know, so she was always there with the editorial comments, and my dad was not a man of many words, but when he did speak, I listened. But by all accounts, he was the sheriff of the house. And there were times like when I got out of the house and went off to college and, you know, joined the Marine Corps. And there was a couple times where I sat down, I'm like, how did you restrain yourself? Because there are some whoopings that I should have received that how? He's like, son, there is enforcing discipline as a parent, and then there's abuse. And he's like, you were a good boy. And my mom, on, you know, being the snarky, funny one, would say, you know, you failed us. And I'm like, what do you mean? How did I fail you? She's like, you did not prepare us for your two younger brothers. You basically raised yourself. And I was like, well, that's interesting. But to her point, you know, being the firstborn, kind of have a little bit more structure. They have guardrails, kind of like neon bumper bowling on Friday nights, where you're always going to hit strikes because your parents are there. They weren't snowplow parents. They weren't helicopter parents, but they were involved.
Right.
And they were there. And for my younger brothers, they're characters. So, but to bring it all the way back around to your question with my dad, there's a few things that he said that, you know, stick with me to this day. So one of the big ones is, you know, being an awkward, gangly kid in high school. The gal I eventually married was my high school sweetheart. And I'll never forget, we were coming home from practice. You know, I was wiped out. And again, a man of few words, and we're turning into our community. And before we're turning, we're sitting at the light, and he's like, you know, this isn't really any of my business. He's like, but that Carrie girl, she's something else. She's special. Because when he wasn't the football coach, the head coach of our football team, Al Milton, and my dad would go coach the girls softball team. Mainly my dad was just earning a little bit of extra scratch while I was at baseball practice, but Carrie was on the softball team. So that's where we met initially. But then the second big thing amongst many lessons, but just had a hugely impactful piece on my career, was when I graduated from college and got commissioned. He said, look, he's like, I haven't told you a lot about the military, because my dad was in the Army during Vietnam, and right before he was getting ready to deploy, the war ended. But I'd always see in his drawer, he'd had all of his little Army trinkets, because, you know, in the Army, they've got all their tchotchkes, and the Marines, not so much. But I was always fascinated by what all of those things were. But he told me, you know, right after commissioning, he's like, look, I'll just let this piece of advice sink in. He's like, find your best non-commissioned officers, figure out who the ones are that are smelling you steak oil and the ones that are legitimately delivering, and then be the best lead blocker you can for them. And if you take care of them, they will take care of you 100 times over. And that guidance never failed me. And he was so right. And I'm so glad he said that. But then that was reinforced by all of my follow-on mentors, you know, enlisted and officer, who really took me under their wing, you know, kind of like, you know, the whole Lion King thing where they're holding you up, you know. And I was really, really fortunate. So that kind of tie between, you know, a father who is not a man of many words, but I knew he was really intelligent, read all the time. And that was another thing that he told me, is like, read everything. My mom, along with being very funny, she was always the one that would say, dream big. Don't let anybody tell you can't do anything. You know, dream big. And kids need to hear that. But they not only need to hear it, they need to believe it. And I grew up in a household where I never doubted that I was loved. And, you know, I hear so many stories of friends who, and people that we all know, where they're like, you know, this is my home life, blah, blah, blah. I never for a minute did not feel that. So back to your initial question of, did I ever blow my parents off? Oh yeah, I was a knucklehead teenager. You know, that's just what we do, but that's all part of your formative years. And, you know, as your frontal lobe is developing, which doesn't get complete till 25, 26, you know, you're going to do stupid things, you know, play stupid games, win stupid prizes kind of things. But my parents were really good in that regard. I knew the boundaries. and, they held me accountable because, rules and laws that are not enforced are merely suggestions. Well, I knew where my boundaries were.
And I would imagine that even though your dad was guiding you on your sports journey, to have the self-discipline to stick with spring ball, weight training, off season, that there had to be a little bit of self-discipline already in you. So when you say you were a knucklehead, I'm assuming that it wasn't way off the rails type troubles.
No. Actually, I'd like to say that I was too lazy to get in trouble because I didn't want to deal with the ramifications of being in trouble. So, I like to say I was a rule follower, but I was still a kid,
right?
And you're still going to do things where, even with my kids, it's like, I think I just got dumber watching that whole scenario play out. How did you do that? But, that's where learning occurs. So yeah, to your point, I think the structure in my life, that efficiency, I'm not big into quoting like folks often, but like Jocko Willink has a great quote, discipline equals freedom. And when I first heard that, I'm like, I've always subscribed to that. If you have a plan, and I had a boss when I was stationed in Okinawa, and he used to say, he who has a plan rules. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So, no matter what, especially in the Marine Corps, like they're always teaching us and reinforcing, by law, we're supposed to be the most ready when the nation's least ready. So we're those type A folks who are always thinking about, okay, life's a choose your own adventure novel. Well, if we have these operational plans, what are our different options? We always got to give ourselves an out. So that whole mindset has kind of permeated through my whole life. But there was a lot of growth between college and when I got my first master's degree. A lot of growth. I think early on I was trying to do too much. I didn't understand that how to study and how to plan and how to interlock all of those initially. And it wasn't until I graduated college, got commissioned, was actually out in the world where that stuff started. I had a better idea of how to really pick and choose what I needed to do to, ensure the team won, and ensure the team was in the best position, ensure my Marines and sailors were in their best position to succeed. Because, if they're succeeding and you're helping them in their growth, they're going to take care of you. Like my dad said, right. They're going to take care of you a million times over. But all of that stops and starts with, I learned that, the officer's responsibility in this game is to really be the planner, really being the one thinking ahead, thinking big thoughts, so your people can actually take care of business. And I just kept working on that, kept sharpening that blade's edge. So
going back to being a young man, off the field, were you good at academics, or was school, the academic side, an importance to you?
It was, but it's just kind of like I love running, but I sound like a pregnant yak and I'm not really good at it. Like I love academics, and now like love reading and all that stuff. I appreciated academics. Like I was always the kid who, my dad had a stack of National Geographics and I was always reading them. And again, my dad, being the big reader and my mom being the big dreamer, that little, back in the day when we had National Geographics, that was a big deal. But to answer your question, I was class president from 8th grade all the way till I graduated high school. Was involved in my sports, and I tried to the best of my ability to do my academics. Graduated with a B average, nothing special at all. Like I said, I don't think I really learned how to study until I was in grad school. And that was really out of necessity because, we had a 6-month-old, and then while I was in grad school, Carrie got pregnant with our younger son, Lucas. So I had to get very efficient in order to, but then I figured it out. And then you get around other real academics, really smart people, and they teach you things that will help you along your way. But in high school, I was wildly average with my academics, not a real good standard test taker, but good enough to, match up my athletic ability with my sports to get a scholarship, if you will.
You mentioned a couple things. One, in your sophomore year, your parents sat you down and basically had the talk of, we can't afford to potentially send you to college. So you need to utilize your skills and abilities on the athletic field to get yourself a scholarship.
Sure.
And then you mentioned your dad being in the Army and having seen his things while you were growing up.
Yeah.
Was the conversation for you to potentially go to college on a scholarship just to go to college? Or when does the military start melding with that? And was it your dad or your mom and dad, or was it something you did on your own?
That's actually a great question. So Top Gun generation.
Okay.
Again, great hair, didn't know how to play golf. So that was kind of off. We'll talk about that in a second. But what do most kids, at least from our generation, what were our future jobs? Police officer, fireman, astronaut, professional athlete.
Astronaut never hit my radar.
I grew up in Fort Lauderdale.
Oh, okay.
Just down the coast from the Space Coast, NASA, the space shuttles and all that kind of stuff. So a bit of exposure to that. So I was like, I want to be an astronaut. Well, I'll never forget 7th grade in the locker room after PE, and my buddy David Needs comes up to me. He's like, Brian, he's like, I heard of a school that makes astronauts. And I'm like, oh, tell me more. And he's like, it's called the Air Force Academy. And I was like, oh, that's where I'm going. That's like, now I have a goal. Like, I'm going to that school. I don't know anything about it, but if they make astronauts, I want to go there. Well, lo and behold, life takes off. And, by the time my senior year rolled around, I was really, really fortunate enough, mainly because of where I was playing football in Broward County. It's one of the hotbeds of football in the country. At one time, it had the most NFL football players from any county in the country were from Broward. So by the fact that I was playing against such great talent, there's a lot of scouts and everybody. I ended up getting recruited by the Air Force Academy, West Point, Naval Academy, Coast Guard Academy, and Merchant Marine Academy. And then when I actually took my visit to Annapolis, that's where, you get asked the question, why did you go there? And it sounds as cheesy as it can be, but it was a calling. Like, as soon as I walked onto what they call the campuses, the yard, I was like, this is home. This is where I'm supposed to be. But it all started in 7th grade with my buddy David saying Air Force Academy. But then, you learn, you grow, and, ironically find out that the Naval Academy actually produced the most astronauts at the time as an undergraduate institution. But that's kind of the funny story of where all those concentric rings, that Venn diagram kind of crosses over. And I fully went to the academy, went to the Naval Academy wanting to fly. And then lo and behold, I ended up in the Marine Corps when I graduated for a series of events, and, you learn, you grow, you see where you are with regards to your talents. And when it came time to choose, I was actually very fortunate. I got offered a Navy flight contract, and I got offered a Marine Corps contract, and I ended up taking the Marine Corps contract. I mean, full disclosure, you take tests, and the standards to be a pilot in the Navy, mainly due to population, is a little bit looser than what it was for the Marine Corps. And for whatever reason, there was one score on the Marine Corps test, the exact same test, but you had to get a certain amount, really kind of weed out the population. And for whatever reason, there was one score that I kept up coming up like 1 point shy. Well, from my vantage point, I was like, there's a reason why that's happening. And I know plenty of people study for those exams, and they're really supposed to be exams that look at your spatial recognition and how you do all those things. And I'm like, if that's not coming natural to me, that's probably not my path. And plus, I felt like I was much better dealing with people in non-technical ways at the time. So, that's what ended up, when I graduated from college, why I ended up going in the Marine Corps on the ground side versus on the aviation side. And, the whole reason I'm here is because my buddy Whiskey Lee, who you had on here, who was an amazing pilot, I have complete respect for the aviation community. My son is now an active duty Marine. He's in the aviation community. He's an Osprey crew chief. So there was always in the back of my mind, I wondered, wow, what it would have been like to fly. But, seeing how my career turned out and everything that I'm doing now, like that was my calling. Like that's what I was supposed to do. And, so that's kind of a long-winded answer to your short question.
With the desire to fly from a very young age, prior to to actually go into the academy. Had you done any flying? Had you kind of gone down that?
We didn't have that kind of money to pay for flying lessons or any of those kind of things. And, that just wasn't in the cards. I was fascinated by it though.
You entered the academy in 91?
Actually 92. I went to prep school. So in between going to the academy, graduated high school, I knew that academically I was not strong. And, the way the system is set up, that each academy has a prep school associated with it. And they have what are called foundation schools, which is like a constellation of prep schools around the country where they'll send people. I was actually being recruited to come in direct entry. And on my recruiting visit, my hosts who were taking me around told me about the prep school, and that had never been even on my radar screen at all. I didn't know anything about it. And on my recruiting visit, I told the coach who was responsible for recruiting me, I'm like, I want to go to the prep school. He's like, what? It's like, nobody has to go to the prep school. I'm like, well, I'm asking. I said, this place is incredibly overwhelming. I see how bright the talent pool is. I'm like, if I can get an extra year, which basically amounts to a redshirt year, that would be a really smart play for me. And that will still be in my top 10 best decisions I've ever made in my life, was going there and having that extra year to grow, get through the homesickness. Everybody deals with that, work through the academics, kind of get a little bit better at studying. Still, I like to say I graduated in the top 88% of my class out of college, which is the bottom 12%, So I needed that prep school year, not just for academics, for athletics as well, to get bigger, faster, and stronger as much as I could.
How was that transition for you, though? We've already talked about that. You probably had a little bit of good self-discipline built in, but stepping into that realm.
It was brutal. I mean, it was grueling. And, but it's designed to be that way, and it's a very, very humbling experience, and it needs to be very humbling. It needs to knock people down a couple pegs, because there's nothing worse than an arrogant leader, and the academies and many of our other non-academy but military-centered institutions like Texas A&M, Norwich, Citadel, VMI, they are leadership schools. They're leadership schools they might have a little flavor of, they've got some Ivy League caliber students, they've got some Division I caliber athletes, they have a smattering of this, smattering of that. But at the end of the day, we're leadership schools. And there's nothing worse than a leadership school producing arrogant leaders who would not listen to their people and cannot play on teams. So that whole process between the academics, everybody had to play a sport. If you weren't a Division I athlete, and right now I think the number at Navy is about 60% of the students are Division I athletes. You had to be on a club sport, or you had to play intramurals, and it was structured. Like everybody had to do it as a part of the program. But so you have your military requirements, you have your athletic requirements, and you have your academics. And, the academics obviously crushed me. But then you layer on the military and the D1 athletics, and that's a very, very humbling.
One huge sandwich to eat.
Yeah, one bite at a time, and but you learn and you grow. And the whole thing with that school, it's not the smartest, it's not the best athletes. The one key trait of everybody that graduates from those schools is effort. If you are willing to grind and put the time in, you will get through there. It might not be pretty, but you will get through. And, there was a stretch during my freshman year where I didn't leave the campus for like 3 months because I was so bad in my academics, as I had to study and continue grinding, or I would have been bounced, and there are cases where folks get let go just because they cannot keep up, and there was no way. So for me, my vantage point was, I don't have anything to go back to, in the sense of like going back to where I grew up. Like I loved all my friends and everything, but from the vantage point of like, I don't have any other options collegiately. So I either have to figure this out or I'm done. And, coming from humble upbringing, I didn't want to let my family down. I didn't want to let my friends down. because I recognize completely that, I was very, very blessed to get that opportunity to go there. And that's nothing to take for granted. So,
So after that struggle, that freshman year, did it, I don't want to say get easier, but did it get easier for you?
Well, academics for me at that time it was, we would take a heavy course load. So from one sense, you weren't going through the plebe year craziness, because when you're a freshman at a military academy, you are basically rushing for a fraternity for a whole year and you're getting the business every day. Not having that definitely helps. But still, I was no academic all-star. I still had to grind.
And not to underplay this, and I know that there is this reputation for a lot of kids who go to school on scholarships. Your job is to play sports. We'll deal with the academics. The academics is what you're there for. You just happen to play sports.
Well, you're there for the leadership knowledge, and I like to say that the athletic fields at the military academies, that's the number one leadership laboratory we have. And if you're fortunate enough to be on a Division I team, no matter where you are in the starting lineup, like you are learning leadership every single day at every turn. Like every one of my teammates and individually are just amazing American patriots, because we all knew you're going to graduate and you're all going to go out and serve in the armed forces, whichever branch it ends up being. From the Naval Academy, you're either going to go in the Navy or the Marine Corps. But one of the big reasons I wanted to go to an academy, even after I found out about the whole astronaut thing, is I wanted to be around people that I wanted to be like, that I aspired to emulate. And, that place did not fail me at all, especially now seeing where so many of these individuals are in their lives right now, and how they have platforms and they're able to help people with that, and they're giving back, and knowing that a lot of us did not come from a lot. Like, it doesn't matter if mommy or daddy wants you to go to an academy. The easy part's getting in.
Right.
The hard part's staying. Like on I-Day when they swear everybody in, induction day, the person who does the swearing in says, look to your left, look to your right. That person will not be here on graduation day. And, everybody kind of chuckles like, haha. Literally, those two people were not there on graduation. And I was like, the one person was like a rock star distance runner. The other one was a very highly touted swimmer, but they just did not have the desire to stay and stick it out and gut it out. And each year has its challenges, and each year has differing kind of responsibilities. But at the same time, I was very, very siloed and very, focused on playing football. But then at the same time, my high school sweetheart moved up to Maryland from Florida, ended up going to University of Maryland. So we dated through college as well. So there was that, I would never call it a distraction, but there was that, you want to make sure that you're giving time, and, it's just not, relationships are 50% is presence. The other 50% is what you do with it, so I had that as well that I wanted to tend to. So
you focus solely on sports-wise football, the 5 years?
College, yeah, 5 years, yes.
That you were there. Mm-hmm. When was it apparent that flying wasn't going to be in your future? You mentioned at the very end the naval option and the Marine Corps option. Mm-hmm. Did it go literally to the very end of your time there?
It did. Yeah, it was definitely something to think about. But a funny story, and I'll get to that. My freshman year, you have to take PE of all things for like Division I athletes. So I took golf. I'd never played golf growing up, could never afford clubs or any of that kind of stuff. And, first day in PE, ball on tee, and I'm just whacking the cover off of it. The instructor for that class was actually one of the assistant coaches on the baseball team. And he walks up and he's like, "You never golfed before?" "No, sir, I have not." He's like, "You're a baseball player, aren't you?" I'm like, "Yes, sir, I am." He's like, "Where are you from?" So he goes down the whole list. He's like, "Wait, you went to that high school you guys just went to the state championships, blah, blah, blah. He started recruiting me while I was at the school, so for my freshman and sophomore year, they were trying to get me to walk onto the baseball team at the time. I'm like, no, I'm a football player. But then to go to your question with regards to the Navy option and the Marine Corps option, it really did weigh on me. But that was really post Gulf War One. And there was a lot of drawdowns, the peace dividends. There was a lot of feedback we were getting from the folks in the operating forces that the flying time was getting curtailed, the maintenance money was getting curtailed. There was definitely some concerns. So that definitely factored into my decision, especially my friends who went in the Marine Corps who were flying. They're like, if I had to do this again, I don't know if I'd go the aviation route. So that factored into my calculus. By that time, I'd kind of figured out the power of mentors and, call the people that you respect. And ultimately, that's what drove me to eventually go the Marine Corps ground option fully. But I was really committed to that after my freshman year. After freshman year, they send everybody from the academy down to Quantico, Virginia, which is where Marine Corps officer schools are, just very general term. And that's when I realized while I was there, I was like, oh my gosh, these are my people. These maniacs are my people. Like, I can relate to them very easily. I understand what they're trying to do, and they're type A. Oh my gosh, I'm type A, so everything lined up. And it was after that, when I came back from that, and I told my parents, like, I'm going to go in the Marine Corps, my mom was already like, she was very proud that I chose to go the academy route. But then when I told her I wanted to go in the Marine Corps, she's like, you want to do what?
Do you make a wish list of duty assignments besides selecting Marine Corps?
That doesn't happen until on the backside. So you graduate, you get commissioned into your service, then you go to basically your technical trade schools to learn your craft. And while you're doing that, then when you complete the big technical training, then you figure out where your follow-on orders are for like operational assignments. And at that time, I was really lucky. I got orders to Okinawa, and Carrie and I, we deliberately wanted to go to Japan. We knew, we were a young couple. We wanted to have that opportunity to grow as a couple. And we knew that there was a lot of additional pays and allowances by going overseas. And she had her school loans that we wanted to get paid off. And so there was like this perfect storm of, hey, let's go to Okinawa. And then we actually ended up extending for a fourth year. So we were there for 4 years total. And our older son, Jacob, was born there.
Was your long-term vision to do a career?
I think everybody entertains that, but it's the ones who don't get fixated on that end up doing it, because at least just a very unscientific study, very just observationally based, the ones who aren't like white knuckling their careers are the ones who are focused on what they should be focused on, which is their people and the mission. The ones who are white knuckling their careers tend to get burned out because they're very internally focused on what are all the ladders I have to climb, the boxes I have to check, and those kind of things. Now, there's folks that will squeak through, but in general, I saw myself. So I'll back up. In college, I felt like, again, I was given a gift by being able to go there. And I had, I like to say I was slow, but I made up for it by having 3 knee injuries in 1 year. So back to back knee
like
injuries.
Surgery knee injuries?
One required surgery. The other ones were just like, again, I had average speed, but I made up for it by getting knee injuries. So that did not help. And I always, even to this day, to a certain amount, never feel like I reached my full potential playing football at the academy. And I always had that chip on my shoulder that I'm one of those people who believes you pay your debts, and you keep receipts. And having that experience at the academy really was a really important catalyst to why I was so like dialed in, I think, as a Marine, because I wanted to feel like I paid my debt back to the institution. Because it gave me everything. It gave my family everything that we have today. So knowing that I didn't really fulfill my full potential, having said all that, one of my personally proudest achievements is I never quit the team. I always stayed. I continued to grind. Had some opportunities where I played a little bit. It didn't finish up the way I wanted it to, or anywhere near what I thought I could contribute to the team. But to this day, I cherish the respect that I have for my teammates when they've come up and said, you could have quit multiple times, but you loved us more than you hated the fact of where you were on the depth chart or where you were doing rehab continually for like a year and a half of just constant rehab from the injuries. And up to that point, I'd never had any injuries. But then you bring that to answer your question, I was always like, hey, if we're enjoying it, let's continue on. And something I didn't really factor in, although I knew Carrie was going to be a fantastic military spouse, like she fully embraced it. She loved it. She's super patriotic. And that right there, when you have a spouse who's all in like you are, I mean, come on. And she was just starting out in her teaching career. So it was two of us newlyweds. She was starting out in her teaching career, and she was teaching on the military bases there, and I was doing my thing. And so we stepped off on a good foot right there. One of my favorite stories, when I was a brand new second lieutenant and she's a brand new teacher, we're sitting at the dinner table after a long day, and she's like, wow, she's like, I had one of my kids bite another kid. I'd never seen that before. I'm like, funny, I had a Marine bite another Marine. And I'm like, our degrees of separation aren't very different right now. But yeah, it just kept getting better, and it kept building. And like I said, I had that chip on my shoulder of like, I got to pay my debt back. And I never lost that. And now, I've, and we'll talk about this later about counseling and transition and all that kind of stuff. I've been asked, well, you're not internalizing that. And I'm like, no, I actually look at that as a positive now, of having that chip on my shoulder, that fire in my gut, of never feeling like I'm entitled or owed anything. That is like a superpower, I think, for a lot of people who kind of figured that out. And again, you couple that with the fact that I had great jobs, great bosses, great Marines and sailors who at every step, everybody I always felt was looking out for me and was looking out for my best. Again, going back to what my dad said, if you're their lead blocker, they'll take care of you. And it just kept building and building and building. And the next thing we know, I get finished with my 4 years on Okinawa, applied to grad school, got accepted to grad school in May of 2001. We're getting on the plane. We're getting ready to fly back stateside. I'd been gone. I'd come back once or twice. Wheels go up on the plane, and I look at Carrie. We got our newborn Jake. And I look at her. I'm like, this is the perfect time to go to grad school. It is such a boring world right now.
If you only knew what was coming.
September 11th hits, and I'm in grad school. And it's just like... What
was your duty assignment while you were in Okinawa?
So when you go to those kind of far off places at the time, and still to a certain extent right now, when you go there, you end up getting jobs that are much more than your actual rank, because you're permanent personnel there. And you'll always have units coming in on deployments that are traversing through the area, the AOR, if you will, or they're coming there as major units to train. But if you're permanent personnel there, you're going to get put in positions and given jobs and responsibilities that
just whatever's needed.
Were typically like a rank or two higher than what I was. So I was like thrown right into the belly of the beast, and it was awesome. I mean, I got to be a platoon commander. I got to be a company commander twice. I was a company executive officer, like second in charge a couple times. Got put in charge of planning for a major exercise, all before I'd actually even put on the rank of captain. And that's what actually enabled me to go to grad school. Is I had already, while I was having fun and doing everything that the Marine Corps was asking of me, I was like, I didn't even realize this. I was checking all these blocks that enabled me to, have the opportunity to go to grad school after 4 years. Because as I was leaving the fleet, all my buddies who were in flight school were actually starting to get out into the fleet, because their flight training takes so long and it's so impressive, all the things that they have to do. But I had already kind of done all that at that stage. because when you go to grad school, or the military pays for any school, for every year that they pay, you owe 2 years back. So I was going to grad school for 1.5 years. So I owed 4 years back. But because I had done everything for those ranks really early on, it kind of fit timing wise in the career progression to come back.
Going back to my earlier question. So the decision to stay in, the decision to go to grad school, it may not have been a basis for the career decision, but were you and Carrie basically taking it until a better option is in front of me to leave the military, we're just going to keep going on this ride?
Great question. And I apologize for not answering it right up front. When I went to grad school, again, the whole, wow, the world's really boring right now. Carrie and I were really looking at, I'd go to grad school, have the payback, and maybe if nothing's really going on, maybe it would be the smart time for us to transition out of the military. And we were really entertaining it at that time.
But that would have put you at about the 10-year mark, right?
Exactly. Yeah. But, that's not uncommon for folks to get out right around that time. But we were just thinking, we were having a good time. It was a good ride. And, wow, they're paying for grad school. I'm going to go to grad school. And
where'd you get to go to grad school?
It was up in Monterey. The military it's Naval Postgraduate School, and it's a blend of civilian and military professors. That, ironically, is the #1 institution in the world that produces astronauts for a graduate school program.
Should have put in for it.
Yeah, well.
Meaning me, because I had the opportunity a couple of years back.
Oh, did you really?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
From the law enforcement side, they were offering a program, but it was not it wasn't just simply sign on the line and you're in. It was there was a process to it.
Yeah. So that's where I went, and so knowing that the war was going on now. Even while I was at grad school, it's like, honestly, everybody there is like, we're going to miss the war, really early on,
Well, based on, you mentioned already the Gulf War, if using that as a metric or a metric, you would have thought, a year, 2 tops, maybe.
Yeah. Well, everybody got a couple bites of that apple, unfortunately, sadly, in many regards. But when you're in the Marine Corps, we make Marines to deploy, and we make Marines to, 3 missions of the Marine Corps: make Marines, do our nation's bidding, win our battles, and create better citizens, So when that came back on, when that was actually put on the board, that definitely was like, okay, I need to start, I'm going to stay. But full disclosure, what really sealed the deal, finished up grad school, got orders to a unit in Indian Head, Maryland. And it was at that time, through a whole series of events, where we actually found out Carrie had a brain tumor. And, have 2 babies in diapers. The world's going kind of crazy with Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to take care of my wife. We got to make sure that she has the best medical care that she can have, and all those sorts of things. And, so we dealt with it while we were on orders out on the East Coast. Then we actually came back here to Camp Pendleton, is where I got orders back. And a doctor up at University of California, San Francisco, was fascinated with her case. He was actually friends with a doctor at Balboa, who ironically was an astronaut, who had come back, was doing his payback at Balboa as the head of oncology and the like, and proposed this idea to have Carrie have a surgery. But you wrap in those 2 things with my obligation and feeling of responsibility and loyalty to the Marine Corps to, participate in Iraq and Afghanistan, and then also wanting to ensure that Carrie was guaranteed to have medical care. That those 2 things combined, I'm like, well, I'm going to take this thing for as long as it'll go, without a doubt. And, even knowing that Carrie had a brain tumor, which she ended up having 9 years before it actually was symptomatic and took her life, even through all of those times, it was still a great ride in the military. But back to her piece with her surgery in 2006, where we went up to UC San Francisco and they did a surgery on her brain to remove about 92% of it, resection. The next day she's coming through out of anesthesia. She's kind of sitting up in her bed, and she looks at me and she's like, all right. She's like, I have a few months, you're deploying in March. She's like, I'll be ready. And I'm like, are we having this conversation right now? Like, what are we talking about?
She's the football player, not you.
Bingo, right? And she's like, no. She's like, we're a Marine family. I'm going to get well. You're going to deploy because that's what we do. And I was just like, who's the warrior in this family? Like, I was just like, oh my gosh, like, she's amazing. Like, it gives me goosebumps to this day every time I think about it. I'm like, talk about the selflessness. I mean, I learned so many lessons from her. She, right, to this day is the finest human I've ever met in my life. And that story just, and that thought, and just the first things that she's saying is like, you're going to deploy, you're a Marine.
How old are your boys at this point?
They're babies still. So 2006, so Jake was born in 01, Luke in 02. So they were 4 and 5 at the time. And, they were just happy kids. They didn't know that mom was getting a surgery or this, that. They knew when she came back, my parents were there to help with the kids. And so God bless them for doing that and helping us through that. But then, talk about, keeping receipts and, putting fuel in the tank. There's nothing quite like getting a letter that gets sent to your house that says, surgery, brain tumor surgery, $350,000 invoice paid in full. And it's just like, yeah, I'm going to pay that back. Like, the Marine Corps has me. That surgery was paid for by the research hospital up at UCSF. And, I'm in. Like,
in your mind, did you have a new exit? Did you actually have a date that you were like, I'm going to give back X number of years?
At that time, I was all in. There was no expiration date on that. And, the crazy thing about that whole thing with Carrie is, typically when you have those sorts of surgeries, they give you 5 years and they give you the all clear. She made it to 5 years, got the all clear. And it was at year 6 when it went nuclear and took her life within 30 some odd days. And, I'm at the 17-year mark. I deployed multiple times from 05 to 09 for about a 60-month stretch. I was gone for 48 months, whether in training, fully deployed, on ship, in the dirt, and she held it all down and was a rock star, complete rock star. And, as the boys were getting older and starting to go back, they were starting pre-K and kindergarten, she wanted to get back into teaching because when their boys were born, we agreed that she wasn't going to teach. And, so
they were all down at Pendleton at this time?
We were at Pendleton at that time, and then finished up at Pendleton, went back to Virginia for grad school number 2, and then had orders to
You love school.
There's something to be said about the timing of school, whereby if you have natural breaks, it's worthwhile. And both of those master's degrees were 100% applicable to my jobs in the Marine Corps. And to this day, I still are cashing in the chips on that.
Was a doctorate ever an option while you were in the Marine Corps?
While I was in the Marine Corps, no way. My dad got his doctorate degree when he was in his 60s. While he was living in Japan with my mom for a decade, worked on his doctorate degree while overseas. And
Did they go to Japan because you were deployed there?
No. When we had Jake in Okinawa, my mom actually flew out, and there's always a roll of the dice. When mom says she's coming out to help, Carrie and I are like, oh boy, she was a rock star. But what she got exposed to was the classrooms and the schools that Carrie was teaching in. And my mom was like, this is incredible. And oh, by the way, there's no disciplinary issues. Like, they will send kids home. And dad or mom will stay on orders while the family goes home with the kids if there are problems on the base. Wow. So my mom's like, this is the greatest thing since a pocket on a shirt. So she's telling my dad, she's like, we got to get into these DOD schools. So sure enough, my dad, ended up going to England, taught over there. for about a year or two, and then put in a request. My mom always wanted to go to Japan, so they ended up going to Japan and teaching on the DoD schools there. And that's kind of how that worked. Well, all throughout that, my dad was working on his doctorate degree. But bringing it back to me, when I was done with grad school number 2, I'm like, I'm done. Like,
what was the motivation for the second grad degree?
So the way the military does their education, you can go to like a naval postgraduate school or a Harvard or any of like the bigs to get a graduate degree. But then in your career progression, in order to qualify for the next rank, there are certain professional military education requirements that you have to fulfill. In the second grad school is actually a professional military education requirement fulfillment with the option to get a master's degree. And I took the option to get the master's degree. You basically had to write a thesis and do a lot of research and study, and have one of your professors as a mentor. You complete all that, and then boom, you get the master's degree. It really amounts to, to make it simple, it's really a strategic planning master's degree.
Is there still the additional years of service requirement even for that one?
Mm-hmm.
So that tacked you on another 4 years?
Another 2 years, because it was a 1-year master's. Okay. I mean, it was like hardcore. It was great. Loved it. But after that, I was like, ironically, Carrie was working on her doctorate degree when she passed. And she was midway through getting it through USC, through their cohort in Hawaii. And so it was like super opportune that I was getting orders back to San Diego, because then she could just drive up the road to USC to complete it. And, life had a vote, and she never was able to complete her degree, which weighed on me for a long time, because again, being the consummate military spouse who always kept everything together and did all that, I carried around a lot of guilt for a while, because I never had my chance to pay her back. And, so you ask about the timing of things. We knew, like, the decision point was, okay, we're coming back to San Diego. It's going to get us to 20. And we could have a decision point there that she completes her doctorate degree, gets a job that she really likes in one of the school systems, because she had already taught out here once. And all of those former colleagues of hers and principals had now moved up into senior leadership roles within the school boards and all those kind of things. So the decision was, and I told her, I'm like, look, if you get into a good situation and it's making your heart sing, like, I'll retire, I'll drop papers, and like, I'll become a substitute teacher, or I'll be, daddy daycare or whatever. I'll have my retirement and medical, and you'll be pursuing your dream, which I want to support you in, and I would always jokingly say, like, become a principal of school and I'll become like one of the football coaches, like my dad. Or the athletic director or something like that. But then, life took its course and really made the decision for me. I was at 17 years, had command on Miramar at the time, and I knew that there's no way I could go past that. And I couldn't deploy anymore. Like, my boys were 9 and 11 when their mom passed, and I needed to be present. Thankfully, Carrie's sister, my sister-in-law, Joellen, I don't even call her sister-in-law anymore, my sister, Joellen, she ended up moving in with us for several years after I retired from the Marine Corps and started up in the private sector. And in there is like a huge mishmash of issues, because when we found out that it went from a Monday being a year, Tuesday being 6 months, and then the following week being only weeks. When they first told us that, they had a whole bunch of people in the room, and they told us, like, they were ready. Like, and Carrie looked at me and she's like, look, you've been all over the world. You've seen a lot of crazy things. Never once have you needed counseling, or have I thought that you needed counseling, because her master's was in counseling and personal services and all that kind of stuff. She's like, but you have to promise me, you have to swear to me that you will make yourself open to seek counseling. And I've been doing it ever since. But that inflection point, cannot be overstated. And anything I say would be a complete understatement about, at that inflection point where, that, when she was in the hospital, I had to take the number one person in my life, the love of my life. I had to take her off life support. I put my career on life support, and I was looking at anything and everything I could do not to screw up those boys any more than had already been put on them, and it was at that point where that was the inflection point in my life where I knew anything that we had planned was 52 pickup. The whole deck was just thrown up in the air. I knew that I was going to have to get out and transition. I knew that I was going to, if there was one thing that I was going to do, I was going to create stability for those boys, no matter what I had to do. Gave up a lot of lucrative job opportunities to ensure that I could be there for my boys, just like my parents were there for me. One of the biggest gifts that my parents gave me was they were always present at my events, and they were always cheering for me. And like I said, I never felt like I lacked love. And I wanted to give that to my boys as much as humanly possible, even within the mess that we were living with, And on top of that, like Joellen, who was living with us, she was grieving the loss of her sister, and everybody around us was grieving, and it was hard. Again, understatement of the year by saying that, but all of those events individually are a lot, but then on top of that, transitioning out of the Marine Corps, where there's already those transition anxieties you have where you're like, what's your identity? What are you doing? But then on top of that, wanting to stay in Southern California, which you cannot do on a retirement salary. Like, you've got to get a job. You have to do things that, make all of that possible. So it was at that inflection point at my 17-year mark where I knew, like, it's not a new chapter. It's like, it's a whole new book. So put the old one on the shelf.
Chapter one.
Let's start writing. And yeah. So
before we go into your transition planning and your transition out, one of the things that I read in doing some of the research on you, I'd like to tell you the story of, so you told the president to get off the treadmill because you needed to use it?
No, I didn't say that.
I put that editorial in. I just read that you had an incident, I want to say while you were in Okinawa, while you were on the treadmill.
In Hawaii, of all things. So, President Obama, that's where he would go vacation in the summers. And, we knew the president was there, especially where we were on Kaneohe Bay where we were living. So, everybody knows you're going to be on lockdown. And I'm like, well, I'll get to the gym super early. It won't be a big deal. I'll get my workout in because I know he goes to the gym later in the morning, blah, blah, blah. And I don't know what it was, how the timing worked, but I'm running. I'm on the treadmill. I'm knocking out.
That pregnant yak.
Yeah, exactly. And right next to me, the president's standing, he's running next to me. He's like, hey. I was like, sir? And it was one of those experiences where you expect to fly off the back of the treadmill. And I was so in my workout zone that I wasn't even paying attention to anything around me. You get in the gym, it's your safe space, if you will. And I was so focused that I didn't even see all the Secret Service agents and everybody that was in there. And he just hopped on the treadmill next to me.
Happy that he's running on a treadmill as opposed to them having to go on a run with him.
Oh, yeah. So...
did you have to peek over, though, and look at his incline and look at his speed compared to yours?
Did not do that. What I did is my run quickly ended and I got out of there. So, but that was funny.
Unique experience.
It was.
So let's make our transition into your transition. So you're about 3 years out, you knew, hey, this is going to happen. Mm-hmm. What kind of planning did you start doing? Other than knowing that you wanted to try to stay in Southern California and close to your boys? Or was it more to keep your boys centralized or in one place?
They had already been multiple moves, multiple schools, and I wanted to create something that, they could hang their hat on that would be secure for them. We were in deep counseling as a family, individually and collectively. But I knew that with Joellen could only do so much. She was her aunt. She's the auntie. And I wanted to get them in a community where we could grow into it. And I knew naturally that there would be an entire cadre of moms and families around us that would be able to bonk me on the head and to say, look, slow your roll. Like, they're still young kids. And, I'm now having been an only parent for so many years, I feel like I can say this without any retribution on this, but the power of having two parents in a house to raise kids cannot be understated. And I was looking for any sort of, help with that to, have those positive feminine influences in my boys' lives, because I feel like that was incredibly necessary to their growth. And it was even more important because they were getting into those years where my impact was going to be even more, because boys in their teenage years, they need their dad. And Carrie made that very clear to me. I got back from a deployment in 2005, and, it was like third or fourth day I was back. I walk into the house and Jake's in this little blue uniform with an orange hat. And I'm like, what's that? She's like, well, that is a Cub Scout. And I'm like, really?
And the meeting starts in 30 minutes. Go.
Well, it was better than that. And because I'd never been in Scouts or anything like that. And she's like, our friends down the street, they're starting a little den. And she's like, don't worry about it. By the time they're ready to be Boy Scouts, they're yours. And I'm like, huh? She's like, no, I really like scouting. I think it aligns with our family values. And she would always say, she's like, we are not raising little boys. We're raising young men. And this is all a part of their process. And she would always tell me, she's like, single digit boys need their mama. They need to learn how to love and be loved and all those kind of things. But when they're double digits, they need their dad. She's like, that's where you come in. I'm like, but Scouts?
Did she come from a military family?
No, it was just who she was.
Just her bearing.
Just who, when I say I was married to Mary Poppins, like, I was married to Mary Poppins. Spitspot, like, she was the one who, when the 3-year-old is walking in front of her, she's literally standing at the door watching him put his shoulder into the door to open the door for her. Like, there was that, like, she was teaching that sort of etiquette and stuff. And I would just chuckle. I'm like, she made it easy. She was a great daddy coach. But all that being said, I wanted that stability for the boys. They needed that stability. And on top of that, I knew when I retired, I didn't want to move on base and then have to move them off base into another place. Because then that's a whole other series of drama that was unnecessary. I wanted to get him into a place and move out and start building those relationships. So,
as far as what you wanted to do post-military, did you have an idea? You obviously got 2 master's degrees under your belt. Mm-hmm. What were you kind of leaning towards?
That's a lot to unpack right there. At the time, I think a lot of transitioning military service members get fixated on, what do I have to earn? And we get so deep into our careers that you become a generalist on so many topics, and so many fascinating topics at that it's kind of hard to put your finger on it per se. But this is where mentors come into play. So because I knew at the 17-year mark that I was going to have to get out at 20, I really started leaning into this thing called transition. And it was important too, and I advise all of my peers who are still in, like, you can't start your transition process too early. And more importantly, you should be going to the military transition courses yourself as early in your career as possible, so you can kind of get that shock and awe of all the things you have to be aware of. Why? Because the more you know about it, the better you can coach and mentor your folks who are getting out. Because some Marines and sailors they'll only do a 4-year hitch and then they're out, And I think it's unfortunate that you have uniformed service members giving transition advice to young folks who are getting out when they have zero experience in it, most of them. And it's not an indictment on them. That's just how the system was set up. But when I took command of my unit, I actually spoke to my boss. I'm like, hey, I'd really like to go to the first couple of days of the transition course. I don't want to do the whole thing. I just want like the first day or two, because it was very relevant to me, because I knew I was going to be getting out. And that's when it hit me. I'm like, who the heck am I? How can I counsel these folks who are getting out if I have zero clue on what that looks like? And that was really the first step on my journey. My boss looked at me, he's like, hey, that's not really a bad idea. Go to the first couple of days and then let me know what you think. And sure enough, I went. I was incredibly appreciative that he would do it. And I went back and I gave him a full report, and he's like, that's a great idea. He's like, I'm going to encourage all of our officers, no matter where they are, to, if we can get them in, we'll get them in for like the first couple days, just to get a taste of it, to get that shock and awe. Because when you're fully in it, like, holy smokes, it is completely overwhelming. I like to say I've been shot at, rocketed, grenaded, coming to hot LZs, but there are very things more terrifying than transitioning out of the military, especially in my scenario. And so when I do have the opportunity to speak in front of transitioning service members and stuff, I tell them my story, and I tell them, like, this is not a pity party. I don't even want to hear anything about that. I'm telling you this because if I can make it through my circumstances, y'all are going to crush it. They need to hear that positive spin on it. But knowing that, I basically had a 3-year runway. And in that 3-year runway, just like anything in life, you want to go fast, go by yourself. You want to go far, go with others. So I started figuring out, where would I go to be around business professionals in the community? Because I knew the first question you have to answer for yourself when you're a transitioning veteran is, where do you want to live? And then you could start targeting your networking. So I knew we were staying in San Diego. Had a lot of anxiety about that because I didn't know exactly how much I needed to earn on top of my retirement and losing the non-taxable housing allowances and those kind of things, what I needed. So what I was trying to do is number one, you got to learn how to walk and talk and dress. You remember Granimals when we were younger, where you'd go into Kmart and you'd purple underwear, purple shirt, purple pants, or
match the animals
and everything works. Well, in the military, it's like, here's your uniform. Well, one of my funnier stories is like, I need to learn how to, and somebody, I can't even remember who told me, they're like, go to Nordstrom's, they have fashionistas, they will take care of you. And sure enough, they were awesome. I walked in, I'm like, I'm going to be transitioning.
I need real people clothes.
I need to know how to dress myself. And they're like, we got you. We love veterans here. It was in Nordstrom's down in San Diego. So they're like, we love vets, whatever you need. And that was just one of many little journeys of, learn how to dress, learn how to talk, really understanding what a network is. And, what is networking? It's trusted relationship building over time. So whereas I was forced in to be getting my transition 3 years out, that turned out to be an incredible luxury for me when I was getting out, because I had spent 3 years really getting to know people in the community. I found myself being able to communicate with all of those and having a much more apathy and empathy. Empathy is a better term. The empathy for those who are transitioning out, because I was psychologically, I was understanding what all the things that they were weighing, especially for the young folks getting out. Do I go to college? Do I immediately take a job? Do I go home? Oh my gosh, in a month, I'm not going to have a paycheck. You're seeing all of these things, and because of my station in life, I had a much bigger appreciation for that. And, it really informed my transition. But then, of course, you do all the things that you think you're doing right, and then it really comes time to get out. And the biggest thing that I found to be frustrating is, transition fatigue is real. You have, just in San Diego County alone, you have 3,000 nonprofits that say they focus on veterans. But you got to separate the wheat from the chaff on that. You don't know which ones are actually legit and which ones are just working the cocktail circuit to make money for themselves. So that was incredibly frustrating, but then also understanding that networking is a skill. And, you hear go network. And it's like, well, where? Like, what does that look like? How do you make that happen? So, and this was in, 2013, 14, 15 timeframe, where the military was just starting to recognize that, hey, we got a problem. We've got to fix this. We have to remedy this. We are doing a disservice to our transitioning service members. We've got to get better at it. So there was an interesting convergence at that time where, we were just on the leading edge of, like, I don't know if you've heard of Skill Bridge or programs like that, where they were just starting to come out and they were kind of groping their way around in the dark, trying to figure that out. But right around 2016, at the time that I was getting out, was definitely you could feel the pressure. It's like, okay, I'm getting out. What do I want to do? Like, I didn't really know what that looked like. And that is such a common thing for folks in transition. No matter what stage of life you are, it's like, what do I want to do next? Do I want to continue on with what I'm doing? Or do I want to take a complete sea change and take on a different career? And just by happenstance, I kept running into these two other Marines who had already retired, but were still, they were still working on their transition. And we just naturally started congregating. And when we would see each other at these events, we would always end up at the same conversation point. Like, how do we network? Like, what does this look like? This is so frustrating. We have all of these great American patriots on the outside who want to help us, but they have no idea how to help us. And the lack of enthusiasm is not our problem. Like, there are so many people who want to do so many great things for vets and, really want to be on the front end. And so we're like, number one, finding networking events is like impossible. We're like, well, we're going to start networking events. So next time we meet, everybody bring a friend. 5 months into it, we showed up. And so kind of our little concept was Kevin Cortez, Phil Kendrow, and myself. I'll never forget, Kevin's like, hey, I've got a membership to the university club down in the city. And he's like, let's all have lunch and let's kind of talk through this. And we were like, okay, we kind of came up with the concept of like, hey, there's 140 some odd craft breweries in San Diego. Veterans need a place to meet. Veterans like beer. Beer's fun and relaxing, and we just want a chill networking environment.
But it's not a drinking group.
It's not a drinking club. And these are all things that we had just talked about. Well, it wasn't until about the fifth month, by the law of exponents, we walked into AleSmith on Miramar Road, and we've got eyeballs staring back at us, 50 of them, 50 sets. And all of them are like, hey,
we're here to network.
We're told that you guys know how to network. And we're like, oh boy. We have a problem. And the problem is it worked. But we didn't have a charter, and we wanted to make sure. We all looked at each other like almost in stereo. We're like, everybody has to know that we're not a drinking club. Like, we're here to be business professionals, even though none of us had jobs really. But we're going to network and we're going to help each other out. Literally the next Tuesday, we went to Stone Brewing up in Escondido. I guess down in Escondido because we were north, and we wrote the charter out. We had a couple of different versions of it, and we settled on it. We were out in the back area of Stone.
But you're still in at this point, or are you out?
By that time, I was out.
Okay.
And so that was October, November of 16. We'd had our first gathering in June. Official gathering in June at Second Chance Brewing, and they have been great to us. Virginia, who is the owner, has just been a fantastic supporter of us throughout all these years. So that's where all of this networking, now thousands of people online, chapters all over the country, all with the simple concept of, we had really three goals. We wanted to help veterans in transition, help them sort through all the wheat and the chaff and all the noise, all those folks who claim to help or hire, be able to say thumbs up or thumbs down, go to these groups, go to these people. We wanted to remind ourselves continually that, we have been given this gift of going through the military and being taught that, you lead people, but you manage things. And to remind everybody that, look, your service doesn't stop when you take the uniform off. It's actually just starting. And wherever town, community you go back to, you want to be the one that everybody points at to say, that's what right looks like. Go serve in your communities. Go give back. And then the third piece, which we really looked at initially very lightly, was we wanted to have a gathering place where all veterans could always come back to. And because we were so initially focused on transition and networking, we didn't realize just how important that was. And there have been times where we've had people who are not looking for jobs at all, but they just want to be in the same space as other vets. And so all three of those goals have stood the test of time. We've only tweaked the charter, like change happy to glad, small dog to little puppy here and there. But for the most part, the goals have stayed the same. We've discovered over time kind of what our values are. We say it all the time, truthfulness and authenticity will continue our organic growth, because we wanted to be organic. But now that we have chapters all over the country, one of our biggest fears, and we saw this with, again, 3,000 nonprofits that are just veteran-centric, along with the other 10,000 that are nonprofits for whatever space they work in. One of the things that we saw that was really the contaminant or the fly in the ointment or whatever would mess up the recipe. Whenever you introduce money and the need to do fundraising, it immediately has second and third order effects that can really compromise your truthfulness and your authenticity. So for years, we have completely avoided that. We've always said no sales, no fundraising, no politics at our events. No questions. Like, don't come and try to sell your books or sell real estate. That is not what we're here for. You're here to help vets, in their transition. We want to provide mentors to vets who want them. We want business professionals. We want every event. We don't want to know half the people that are there, because that means we're constantly turning over and helping people, and they're going on their way. Hopefully some will come back to mentor and things like that. But at the end of the day, we wanted to make sure that we could maintain the sanctity of that. Well, because we have so many chapters all over the country now, we really had to take a step back and say, we've had companies and organizations approach us and say, who do we make the check out to? We're like, what are you talking about? Like, well, we'd like to donate to you. And we didn't have any mechanism to do that. So we're actually in the process right now of dotting the I's and crossing the T's with all the lawyers and everything, of actually creating a national 501c3. Pre-COVID,
I'm going to stop you right there, because you failed marketing 101. And you've explained everything that the group does. You have not said the name of your...
I'm going to get there.
Oh, okay.
I'm going to get there.
Because, at this point now, I'm hoping people are listening going, well, I'm interested in that.
Well, yeah. Well, you got to keep them wanting for more, right?
Okay.
So, and this is a good segue into that. Anheuser-Busch pre-COVID actually approached us. And to their credit, they said, we want to do better at veteran outreach. And we heard of this group called Veterans Beer Club. And we heard you guys are just knocking it out of the park, and you got chapters all over, and we want to be a part of that. Well, then COVID hit but that was kind of like the light bulb that went off for us, where we're like, oh boy. Like, if we have international companies like that wanted to reach out to us to say, hey, we'd like to get a little bit of your secret sauce. That's when we started talking about it, and then it really hit. And then in this last year or two, that's when we were like, all right, we got to knuckle down on this. We want to make sure we're giving the chapters resources. So the mantra of no sales, fundraising, and politics, we kind of tongue in cheek say we're firewalling that off from the chapters. But ironically, that's going to be exactly what we're doing at the national level. So we want to find that balance. And we've got a great group of folks who are helping us put the bylaws together and really ensuring that we've got everything covered down, because we're deathly afraid of compromising our culture that we've built through trust and authenticity. And we want to make sure that continues to go on long after, we step off the bus, because, we've already had multiple changes in the San Diego chapter leadership by design. We want the young, youthful face and energy. So even though Kevin, Phil, and I turned it over several years ago, it's still cranking great. And it's exactly how it should work, because the sign of any successful organization is a leader can step away and it's going to still flourish. Well, we want to replicate that on the national level, because we also know that chapters in different geographical locations have their own issues, and they're not as fortunate as we are, have like the second highest concentration of vets outside of DC,
Were the additional chapters by design, or just by somebody willing to start a chapter in a given geographical area?
Well, we had a lot of folks who were VBCers for years, and then they moved, and they're like, I want to start one up. We're like, okay. The first question we would typically get is, hey, how much does it cost to run a VBC? We're like, $0. Our currency is our people, as with any strong and productive organization. And they're like, that's it? It's like, yeah, you make a call to whatever brewery you want to go to, or whatever, place. For San Diego, it works for breweries. And typically, I would call up, or Kevin or Phil, and we would say, hey, we just want to let you know on this date, you might have 50 veterans show up in your bar and you might want to get an extra. And before they can ask, well, who are you? Click. So then we show up, we're like, well, we called you. And then the next thing you know, we actually started having breweries call us. And organizations that have really cool spaces. Like we just did a Veterans Beer Club gathering at Mount Soledad on October 19th, up on the mountain, and we did a tap takeover. We had a veteran-owned brewery that has maybe a smaller storefront come, and they can bring their beer there and sell it at the event. The breweries that have a larger floor space where we can actually have the events will go there, but we're kind of mixing it up a little bit to match, to make sure that all the breweries get a bite of that apple. And because there's veteran breweries popping up, we want to make sure that they're getting business as well.
So even though it's I don't know if you call it the San Diego chapter, it moves around quite frequently. It's not in the same location all the time.
We deliberately move it around. We don't want an old boy or an old girls club. We want nothing more than South Bay to say, hey, when are you going to have a VBC? Well, we've broken the county up into thirds, so you'll see us next quarter. And of course, there's going to be times where you'll have back-to-back North County or back-to-back Central or back-to-back South. But to the best of our ability, we try to move it all over the county because we recognize that the veteran population is all over the county. There's actually an Inland Empire VBC that works this area up here at Temecula, Menifee, Riverside, and the like. And what ends up happening is we have folks that come here, they go somewhere else and they're like, I want to start a chapter. And we say, well, it's the rule of 3. You got to have 3 founders. Ideally, you have 8 on your leadership team because you start getting these things going. Life happens. You want to make sure you have a deep bench. Any championship team, it's not their first stringers, it's the bench that gets you to the trophy. So we have that layer on, and in the last couple of years, we've actually created regional leadership teams that will interface with the chapters. Built as flat of an organization as we can, but still to be able to get the information out. So when chapters want to pop up and start, they'll have mentors that are built in and can give them all the documentation, coach them through it, talk to them about the pitfalls of, this is what you're going to see. You're going to have folks that are going to want to come and sell real estate and sell books and, make sure you're mindful of that. And so that's kind of the structure. But now what we're doing with the C3 is we want to be a resource provider to the best of our ability.
So for somebody who's thinking, I want to go to one of these meetings, walk me through what they would expect to experience besides networking. Is there going to be a guest speaker?
That's actually part of our secret sauce. No guest speakers under any circumstances. As a matter of fact, about midway through our gatherings, we try to keep it to 10 minutes. And we give typically the first group that goes through will be the hiring managers. We'll let them talk. But before I get into that, I'll kind of talk about the sequence of an event or a gathering. Most chapters have Instagram pages. Because ours is so big, we don't like advertising the gathering because we're not looking for drinking buddies. So it's very much word of mouth. And if you come to a gathering and you're a non-veteran and we actually invite you, if you're a hiring manager or you work for a company, you get on the mailing list. And so the mailing list is kept pretty close hold. We've had significant offers for that mailing list across all the chapters, but we'll typically send out an Evite, Eventbrite kind of thing, let everybody know. They sign out. We get a general numbers so we can tell the location that we're going, hey, this is approximately what we're thinking. And then that will set the tone. And then folks show up, they pay their own tabs. And, we'll give them a red or a blue name tag. Red means I'm hiring. Blue means I'm looking. And just to kind of set the scene, white means I'm just here to be a mentor or do something like that. And then we get going. And then midway through, we'll take a pause, just give some announcements, local announcements of things that are going on in the veteran community, other networking events, other things that they could participate in that would be beneficial towards their transition. Because we tell them all the time, everything you do is networking. There is not one thing that you're doing in your life now. Like I've had job offers while sitting at the soccer field, and a person's talking and they're like, hey, you do that? Well, I know a person who knows a person who knows a person. So it's like, that's why, we're in our gatherings, we go over, how to network, how to dress, how to walk, how to talk, but on an individual level, one-on-one. We don't do speakers, because the constant feedback we're getting is, thank gosh, you guys don't do speakers. We get speakers everywhere. The last thing we want to hear is a speaker. So we're very tight when we do our announcements. Get the hiring managers up, those who are looking to represent their companies, we give them 30 seconds.
So just down and dirty,
just boom.
What we are, what we're looking for.
The Mark Twain theory of, sorry, I wrote you a long letter, I did not have time to write you a short letter. You get 30 seconds and you're cut. And then we don't actually let any of the vets get up and say, well, I'm looking for a job. No. You know where the people are, the hiring managers. Go talk to them. Go work on your networking skills. Go work on your pitch. Work on your brand. You're going to get feedback. We are the tough love group because we want you to succeed. And we're going to help answer those questions. There are no dumb questions. We want you to ask them. That's what we exist for. It's a complete group of altruists, who genuinely want to help veterans. Like I tell folks, I have a great addiction, and my addiction is getting a phone call with somebody saying, I got a job, and you had a little piece of that. That is intoxicating. I love it. I have a help addiction, and I love helping, and I love hearing people get off on the good foot, because as we know, you have a job, now you can provide for your family, and there's so many good cascading effects that come out of that. And that's why we're so hyper fixated on that within Veterans Beer Club, because we want to keep as much talent as we can here in San Diego and in California. But if people do want to go off to other places, we want to make sure that they can get jobs, because the more veterans we get into jobs, the more apt they are to be an advocate to get even more veterans jobs. And it's that positive self-lifting ice cream cone kind of thing.
Are you guys offering any type of virtual component? So for young Marines or any service member who's deployed away from home, but they're coming up on their point where they're going to be transitioning out, can they jump into these virtually?
So during COVID, yes, that's how we survived. Now, not so much. Like, you have to be present. You have to be able to get to the events. Now, there's all the times where we will get calls, and that's part of the product is, hey, who wants a mentor? Who needs a mentor? Like, I field questions through LinkedIn and calls often. If I have a week where I haven't had somebody ask me to just have like a phone call or just some pointers on some things or to review a resume, that's a weird week. But that's what we put ourselves out there to do. And now with the position that I'm in with my adult job, we have openings too. And so I can help push that too, which is great. I'm great. The company that I work for has 27% of our population is veterans, which I love beating that drum. Like, that's an authentic, like, we are legitimately hiring veterans.
What's the skill set of that company, that their business model, and what do they do?
They're in the national security space.
Okay.
Do business consulting and the full spectrum, the whole deal. Program project management, leadership, anything and everything in between on what the clients need.
And with something like that, could not necessarily your specific company, but that aspect of it, can somebody reach out to you away from VBC?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We encourage that. We tell folks, this is just a gathering place, once a month. We protect it. We'll have off-cycle events, where we'll encourage folks to go to other networking events. But we tell folks all the time, if you meet somebody here, go ask them to go out for coffee or another beer. This is just the start of the relationships that you should be building and nurturing as you're not just in your transition, because your networking should always stay on a rolling boil. You should always be reaching out not just for help, but to help others, pull them along the way. So
for a given chapter, whether it's yours or any others, are they on a regular, like a set schedule of meetings, or is it kind of, I don't want to use the word happenstance, but is it kind of irregular? So
we have found in San Diego that either the third or fourth Wednesday of the month tends to be the best. Thursdays tend to be really congested. Fridays tend to be congested. Monday, everybody's recovering from the weekend. Wednesday has been where we typically landed. But it really depends on the chapter and what's going on within their demographics and geography.
But at least once a month is regular.
The goal is it will happen. We haven't missed a month. even with COVID, we would have online, and to see the Hollywood squares for that was pretty impressive, because, everybody was wanting connection, and especially folks were still transitioning out of the military at that time. So we still wanted to be available and, help as much as we can.
Going back to the personal side of it, the mental health aspect that is very prominent today. How did getting involved in something like this help you with your transition?
Huge. We are pack animals. More importantly, for my entire life, I'd been on teams. The time I was a young boy, all the way through the Marine Corps. And, that was one of the things I had to remind myself when Carrie passed, is I can't separate myself from the team. I need my team now more than ever. But those teams will change over time in our lives. And, you have to put forth the concerted effort to build that team for your transition on the outside. And it's going to be small initially, but it has to grow. And it has been, my friends saved me. My boys were my purpose, but all of my friends in my network, my multiple networks, and all those people around me are what kept me afloat. Because I would say it was probably a good 7 years after Carrie passed to where I felt like I could wake up and just feel normal. And it was a long, long, long road. And I was standing on a lot of people's shoulders. There was a lot of dark holes and a lot of hands reaching in and pulling me up and out. And, it really changes your perspective on life when you're in those places. When your fingernails hurt because you're in so much pain, having people around you cannot be overstated. Even though you could be with around 1,000 people, you'll still feel like you're on an island, So that's a long way of saying teams matter and your network matters. And, if you're networking right, you're never asking for a job. You're always asking for advice, and you're always asking how you can help others. And by helping others, you're helping yourself. And that right there is the secret sauce to getting through, I believe. Life trauma is, as soon as you have the strength and ability to look out and see how you can help others, or how your story can inspire others to be a better version of themselves, because you're only in competition. It's you versus you. I just want to be a better version of myself today than I was yesterday. Having said all that, being on a team and knowing that I have a team and friends and family and all of those folks around me, that makes all the difference with my counseling, because I'm still in counseling today, and I will never stop going to counseling. And it's not a weakness. Like I said, one of the hardest things I ever had to do was I hesitate to say submit to counseling, but to make myself available to open myself up to say, okay, here's all the little pain points. Here's my blind spots. I don't know why I don't want to be around dogs. For years and years and years and years, I couldn't figure that out, because I had a dog that I loved and adored that I had to put down 3 weeks before Carrie passed away, or 3 weeks before Carrie's event kicked off. I never grieved the loss of my pup. It wasn't until I explored that and unpacked that I realized, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it is. And that's just an example.
Right.
And it's gotten a little bit off track, but now when I'm around friends and they have their dogs, I'm like, yeah, dog, yeah, that's great. Whereas before I was like, what the heck? But again, I was very fortunate to have a lot of understanding people in my life and supportive, and, they kept me on track. All the moms in the community kept me on track with, raising the boys and our friends and so on and so forth. It always amused me. I'd have the mom say, well, you're raising your boys like they're your Marines. And I'm like, actually I have it backwards. I raise my Marines like they're my kids, because I love them both so much. I just want to see them succeed. But there's a balance there, and that's where the team play comes in.
So going back to you personally in talking about transition, in hindsight, what mistakes did you make that you would either not do again or you would do differently if it was today and you were transitioning?
The one thing, again, because I started so early, that's a thing that it wasn't like a deliberate decision, but it was kind of a positive of starting 3 years out because I knew I needed to have that much time. But the one thing that will always annoy me, two things actually. One was I took the uniform off for the last time on December 7th of 2015. What I didn't realize is most organizations and companies that are hiring typically don't get their budgets released until like February, March. So I couldn't figure out, I'm like, why am I not getting any job offers? I've had all these companies that have been interested and organizations that have been interested, wanted to do interviews. Number one, you're in the holidays, so everybody's dropping their pack. But then coming out of the holidays, I'm like, what is going on? End of February, sure enough, just like clockwork, the spigot opens up and the jobs were coming. But I had already decided at that time, that was more of an ego-driven thing because I had decided that from the time I actually got my DD-214, the actual document that says you're out, it was in March of 16, and I was going to take 6 months just completely off just to recalibrate and, you know, refresh and you know, give back to everybody. About a month into it, I had been driving the boys to school. You know, I was happy. I was like, and Jake, my older boy, was sitting in shotgun, and he looks at me. He's like, "Dad, you got to get a job." I'm like, "What?" I'm like, "I'm having a great time. Like, this transition thing is great. Like, I'm like relaxing and blah." They're like, "You got to get a job." And Luke was in the back seat, and Luke was the quiet boy at the time. And I look back at Luke. I'm like, "Luke, is this true?" And he nods. He's like, "You need to get a job." So what I do, pulled out the Rolodex, called my number one mentor at the time, and I'm like, "Hey, the timeline has shifted. I need a job. I want to get a job." And he's like, "All right, I've known you now for several years. I think I know an industry that you would like to go into that will fit your personality. Come over to my office on April 20th, which is my birthday. And I'm going to introduce you to 6 CEOs of different companies in the construction world." And from that point, I had interviews that successive days and got hired. Was with that company for 3 years, and then literally 3 years to the month, made the jump, and still with the company that I'm with now. So.
You referred to this person as a mentor. Mm-hmm. Is their official job title a recruiter? Because it kind of sounds like a recruiter.
Not at all. He happened to be a mentor that I came across that happened to also run an executive coaching firm, which is not a bad mentor to have if you're in transition.
Right.
Matter of fact, it's like, you want to talk about make it rain with job opportunities, like that's a great mentor to have. But similarly, and this is a good lead in, you know, when you're building your bench of folks, because you're going to do, your networking has to have a purpose. You know, you want to build that bench that can get you into a position to get not just a job, but a career. You know, you want your classic mentors, the ones who can, you know, just go over the basic fundamentals, but you also want quite a few folks in the HR space that are just human resources, that you're not necessarily interested in going to work for their companies, but that can actually review your resume, hear your pitch, review your LinkedIn profile, and give you the honest to goodness, hardcore feedback from an HR perspective. Because again, when you're in the military, you don't know about HR. You don't know about profit and loss statements. You don't know that every single thing you do has an associated cost. You know, these are all things that you don't know the industry. You don't know the people in the industry. So when you're building your bench of your team that's going to get you to that job, those are kind of all the folks you want. It just so happened that my top mentor, and I did a count, I had about 13 mentors that I could call at any time, day or night, if I had questions. But that came over years of building that bench. But then, you know, the number one mentor ran an executive coaching firm.
But now you mentioned that you've changed industries after 3 years. Mm-hmm. Was the industry that you're in now, was that where you wanted to end up when you were first coming out?
I didn't realize how much I missed being in the national security space until I got back into it. But it was more of the job and the timing. You know, there's the old saying, it's 3 years, time for orders. It was literally 3 years. But I was at that point with the company that I was with, and I will be forever indebted to the owners and the leadership of the company. They took a risk on me. I'd never been in construction. And on top of that, it was electrical construction. So my extent of knowledge of electrical construction is don't stick your finger in a light socket, But they took a big risk on me. And I like to think that I made them quite a bit of money. And I wasn't an electrician, but I had the skills to manage people. And ironically, had a lot of the younger folks in the office who were very highly technically experts, but I had the life skills and the leadership. So there was that exchange. But that, I thought I could have stayed in that space for a long time. But, then life changes happen, things, you're just looking at things differently. You're getting that experience under your belt. You're getting all that coaching. You're understanding a little bit more how the private sector works. But more importantly, I was finding out who I was outside of the uniform. And then this opportunity arose with the company that I'm with now. And I ran into one of the first officers I met when I arrived on Okinawa. He was a major at the time. He had retired. He was working for this company. He actually came to a VBC. We got to talk and I'm like, well, what do you do? And he was telling me about what he did. And I'm like, I want some of that. He's like, really? My boss is going to be in town in a week. A week from that meeting.
Opportunities.
A week from that meeting, we had dinner, got tendered an offer, and I've been with them ever since and haven't looked back. And then it wasn't until I was with them that I'm like, that's what I've been missing. Like, I love being in that space. And it was just like VBC scratches my itch of staying in contact with veterans. And that's a part of who I am with helping people. Being in that national security space with all those other patriots who are doing things to protect our freedoms and everything like that. It's a part of my DNA. And I'm very happy working in that space. So that's kind of how it kind of worked out for me. But I've also got some entrepreneurial endeavors, philanthropic stuff going on with regards to time, talent, and treasure, because philanthropy is not all about donating money. It's all about giving your time, like with what you're doing here, and getting the word out on things. It's all about advocacy and things like that. So I have built a very fun lifestyle because, when you're in transition, you really have to define what life wealth means to you. It's not just about the money. For some people, it's like all about the money. Right. But money can buy you unhappiness as well. So I really had to look at, how do I define wealth? What are my value propositions? Like when I go in, although I've worked for 2 companies, I've seen this cycle happen 1,000 times now where people go in and interview. And I remind folks, interviews are a 2-way street. You need to know what you need out of that organization because you're hiring them as well. It's not just they're hiring you. You're hiring them, which means you need to know what your value propositions are. That's very important. And periodically I go back and I check my value propositions against the company that I'm with right now, and they keep getting A+. Great organizational culture, responsible service that they're providing, economically resilient, and they have a great balance between the clients and our people that are in the company. But I tell your value propositions might be a little bit different, but you got to identify what those are. You got to be able to answer the 4 questions that every person who's hiring invariably falls back on, along with the nuances of their company and their ability to employ you with the funds that they have. You got to be able to show them how fast you're going to be able to fit on their team. You got to show them how fast you're going to make them money. You got to show them how fast you can save them money. And you got to show them how fast you can mitigate the risk of you, especially for the new ones coming out, how fast you can mitigate the risk of you not having any idea about the industry, not worked with HR, all those other things that we talked about. You got to be able to answer those questions. And then there's the networking skills. What are the nice little tricks of the trade to leave an impression with somebody when, again, you're trying to build relationships. Networking is a pejorative, and you'll often hear, I love it. One of my favorite things I love to hear from transitioning veterans is, I hate to talk about myself. I'm like, yeah, you do. And I'm like,
but get over it.
No, you've been screaming about yourself your whole career. And they're like, they look at you quizzically. Like, you remember all those ribbons and badges and tchotchkes that you have on yourself? You have been a live wire in stereo for your whole career. Now you actually have to articulate it. What does that mean? What does all of that mean? More importantly, how is that relevant to somebody who, number one, after they say thank you for your service, they are trying to figure out, I want to get this talent in my company, but what does that look like? How do I do that? Are they actually going to fit on my team? Please, I hope they don't show up in a diaper one day in the lobby losing their head, because even though we're in San Diego, exposure to the military is shockingly low. Their frames of reference are the military movies, Full Metal Jacket and all those kind of things, and with VBC, we have a mantra. We like to say we're assets. We're not victims. Don't ever look at us as like a victim. And what's one of the big topics of the day for veterans constantly on blast? You hear veteran homelessness, veterans with PTSD, and we're constantly reminding employers and everybody, look, that's a very relevant set of topics, but it's a very small percentage of the overall population. When you look at the millions of folks who have served, everybody's going to have their own issues. Like, because of what had happened with my wife, I have aspects of PTSD without a doubt. Shockingly, the experiences I had in uniform, not really so much. But so I understand that piece. But yeah, there's going to be plenty of folks will have aspects of it. But, that's not who we are. We bring so much to the table with regards to talent and abilities and life experiences. So we tell vets all the time, look at the company's onboarding plans. Look at their mentor plans. Do they have a mentor built in to kind of guide you along to really get your legs under you? That's where the brilliance of Skill Bridge is, because that's exactly what that program is really designed to do, is to get you into a company, have the military pick up the tab for your first 6 months. And then just after a couple months, companies are like, oh my gosh, this person's incredible. We just need to coach them and shape them in our image. So those are all those things.
Going back, though, to what you were saying about selling yourself or talking about yourself.
Your brand.
That's the one thing that people do need to understand, though, is you could have the perfect resume, 1 or 2 pages of everything you've done in your career. That's not what's going to sell you, though.
No.
It's an overview. That's like trying to say, slap a magazine in a gun and that's how it works. Yeah. I mean, you're giving them the very rudimentary overview of what you've done. You've got to be able to walk into a room and sit across from somebody and expand that resume and talk about how all the things that you're saying you can do, how it equates to their company.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, 85% or higher of all job hires come through networking. What I like to say is your LinkedIn and your resume is your audio-visual check. Gone are the days where you submit a resume and that's what gets you the job. The system is so optimized that for every job that gets put out there, they're going to have 100 or 1,000 resumes that are going to get fed into their systems.
And more than likely, it's computerized and they're just looking for keywords.
So what happens? Ultimately, what happens is the hiring managers go into HR and they're like, I want these 5 resumes. I met this person at a networking event. I want to authenticate that they can communicate on paper what they told me at the networking event. I got a really good vibe off them. Found them to be pretty impressive. And it makes HR, but again, it's all the way back the human piece. It's all about the relationships and the like. So, but to your point about building your brand and selling it. Number one, if it looks like you're selling yourself, you're losing. That's why I discourage any veteran, do not under any circumstances outsource the writing of your resume. That is a critical part of you rebuilding yourself, reinventing yourself. It's not just transition, it's reinvention. Part of reinventing yourself is you got to break yourself down all the way to the bolts to build yourself back up, because when you lay out all your fitness reports or all of your awards and all that kind of stuff, and you're like, okay, what here is actually going to be relevant to anybody that would want to offer me a job? And again, having started that 3 years out, I actually started writing my fitness reports and all of my reports on all my subordinates so much better because it clicked that I can make resume ready bullets for these folks in their fitness reports. And that was actually more in line with the Marine Corps fitness report writing system. I was actually more in line with what the Marine Corps is asking folks to do. Because I was going through the transition process, the light bulb started going off. I started seeing the whole thing. But again, going back to building your brand, you got to break yourself down to the bolts. You got to be honest with yourself. You really, it is repetition, and you've got to got to go to a lot of folks. And, especially for those who are still wearing the uniform that are on their way out, like networking is a second job, and you have to treat it like that. You have to have a plan. You have to know the networking events that you're going to. You have to want to know the demographics that you're trying to reach. Because at the end of the day, one of your first questions is, did you know what you want to do? I have no idea. No clue. It's very much by feel, and I've landed someplace where I love it.
You actually said that earlier, and it stuck with me. And I've not heard somebody put it as the number one thing. And I don't necessarily know if you're saying it's number one, but you said figure out where you want to live, where you want to live, where you want to be. And if that's not where you're currently stationed, that's not where you're going to exit out of the military from, and there isn't a group like VBC where you want to end up, what would you recommend for that networking aspect if you're separated by significant distance?
Chambers of commerce. There are going to be veteran nonprofit organizations in those regions that you're going, but those are typically like the first places I would encourage folks to go over to the VA. Again, you're networking, you're going to meet all the people in those organizations. And if you talk to them, and it's remarkable, the amazingly cool people you'll meet no matter where you land. But for veterans transitioning, to your question, I would tell them to go Chambers of Commerce. Always look for the Chambers of Commerce, because they actually put on great networking events. North County Chamber of Commerce here in San Diego is run by Chris Thorne, veteran. Fantastic. Absolutely epic networking events that they put on. And that's all businesses that are coming together. Great place to go. And a lot of, especially North County Chamber, they have a veteran component built in where they want to take care of vets. And we see that all over the country. American Legions, VFWs, all these places exist where, it might be a much older demographic, but they might have a son-in-law or a grandson, granddaughter, daughter-in-law, or, hey,
you never know where an opportunity can come from anywhere, but you got to put yourself in that place.
You've got to get out there. But I stick by that. The most important decision you can make right out of the gate is knowing where you want to live, because then you can start focusing your networking. And you got to be realistic about that. And one of my biggest anxieties is, was I going to be able to make enough money to stay here? And something else I encourage vets to do, specifically if they want to stay here, is take your last 3 years of tax returns to a tax accountant, a tax attorney kind of thing, and have them run the numbers to tell you what you actually need to make to maintain your standard of living. Because when you lose a non-taxable housing allowance, that's a huge hit. Huge. So you want to know, and I was really overshooting the target when my accountant came back and said, look, this is all you need to earn. I was like, holy smokes. It was like so much pressure lifted off my shoulders. And then that allowed my networking and job search to get even tighter. So
that's a great point of looking at it from where do you want to live, but then from focusing on the financial aspect of what do I need to make while I'm here? Because you said it earlier, I think a lot of us, we get over fixated on just how much we want to make because we just want the most amount of money. It may not take that much money, or vice versa. It may actually take you more money, and you may need to set your standards a little bit higher.
Yeah, well, that's where it all goes back to. You got to define what wealth means to you, and if you're married, your spouse, and your family situations and things like that. That all weighs in. But you take the uniform off. Now you're working to live. You're not living to work. When we have the uniform on, like that's who we are. That's what we do, but on the outside, it's not like that as we know.
So circling back to where we started, we started talking about the beer company that you invested in, but again, marketing 101, you never mentioned the brand name. So I'm going to give you that opportunity now, but you've also mentioned that you've gone down that avenue. So what other kind of companies have you invested in?
So first opportunity is with Protector Brewing. And Sean Haggerty, and introduced from a friend to a friend. Sean has done a great job with the team there, and I really wanted to have an opportunity to create generational wealth while having fun. So that was a good chance. And I was at the brewery one night, and we were it was like on a Saturday afternoon, and we were just chatting And I had been following this other company called Trident Coffee for a while. And just in casual conversation, Sean had mentioned his buddy Eric Johnson, who runs Trident Coffee. I'm like, stop. You know him? He's like, oh yeah, we're buds. I'm like, he's like, yeah, they're actually doing a capital raise right now. Would you be interested? I'm like, absolutely. Great product. You know, they met all of my metrics, philanthropy, you know, good organizational culture, all those sorts of things. And really on a phone call, she's like, all right, I'm sending you the money. But again, I had saved up money. I'm pretty thrifty. You know, I don't live ostentatiously at all. So I had a savings that I was either going to invest like in traditional stuff. But I'm like, well, this is kind of fun. Like I could, and they're good brands. These could make some money. So the agreement I had with both of them was like, I'm going to give you the money. I don't want any payouts until I'm drawing Social Security. So anything that you make or I'm making, just reinvest it. You know, the miracle of reinvesting. You know, compounding interest. That miracle. And then had an opportunity to do another couple things. One of them didn't really pan out. And then bringing it back all the way to the American Legion Baseball, I was on the board of advisors for American Legion Baseball for San Diego County. And one of my mentors, Pops Onstead, is the commissioner for it. He resurrected it several years ago. It's free baseball in the summer for high school age youth here in San Diego. It costs about $3,500 a team. And I made a promise to Pops several years ago that I wanted to figure out that funding gap, so he wasn't always walking around hat in hand asking for money. And you know, through networking, through friends of friends, met Rick Cardenas, who owns Euphoric Distilling. He's largest privately owned distillery in North America, and he's out of SoCal. And was just sitting at the distillery on a Tuesday night, 19 September of 2021, actually. I was like, hey, Rick, I've got a problem. And I said, I think I have an idea that might work. And so 2 years ago, we came up with the idea of creating a spirits line that its number one goal is philanthropy. And before the stuff even leaves the distillery, we're putting money into the American Legion Baseball pot. Well, with COVID, you know, one of his distilleries was in San Marcos. He's moved it down. He moved it down to Barrio Logan. So that was a big effort. But in the 2 years, we're finally at the point of go where we're getting ready to do the releases for the vodkas and the tequilas. He's had whiskey in barrels for 7 years now that it was going to be one of his flagship lines for Euphoric. And he said, I'm so high. I'm excited about we're calling it Bombs Away Spirits. He's like, I want to release the whiskey as the flagship label within Bombs Away. I was like, wow, that's bold. But I'm a believer in all the products. Everybody who's tasted it and tried it is really high on it. But our end goal with doing this, because we know the spirit space is a congested space, but Rick has a tremendous reputation within that whole space and industry. And he sees that it's going to be a winner with how we're doing the branding and the quality of the products and everything. So that will be another philanthropic endeavor. But I've had to put my own capital, as Rick has. I'm going to be 51% owner. I'll be the veteran owner of it. And we're going to do this, and we're going to see how far we can ride it. The reason that we're so confident is because we do not need it as a source of income. It's definitively 100%. It's going to be a philanthropic label, and we're going to see how big we can grow it. And of course, I mean, there's going to be margins and everything, but want to make sure Rick is completely whole. Want to make sure it's not disturbing his production lines for all of his other products that he's putting out. And he's putting out a lot and doing very, very, very well. And this is really a passion project for him, just like it is for me, because when you think about it, especially with our demographics, especially with the majority of our teams in South Bay, he is of Mexican descent, Berkeley educated chemist, brilliant guy. But when I started talking to him about the American Legion model and how, you know, this is definitely going to, American Legion Baseball serves the lower socioeconomic brackets, it immediately resonated with him because he knew the demographics. He's like, I'm in. He's like, we're going to make this work. He's like, this is going to happen. And here we are. So that's another little thing on the side that's just been kind of working. That's been a passion project for us for after hours, because again, we don't need it to live. We want to do it to produce revenue to fund this league so it's free and it can continue to grow. So hopefully, that will all pan out.
Why is every new venture that a Marine is involved in starts in a bar or a tavern?
Well, that's where we got our start back November 10th, 1775 in Tun Tavern. All roads lead back there, right? And, that's kind of the cheeky thing with Veterans Beer Club is we want everybody to, when they hear Veterans Beer Club, we want them to smile or laugh. And we're like, that's exactly the reaction we want. Now let's get down to the business of the business. How do we take care of transitioning service members, getting them in a position to get jobs?
Well, I thank you for your time. I wish you the best with all your endeavors.
Absolutely.
And I hope that Veterans Beer Club just keeps growing.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
I appreciate you watching. But before you go, if you like the video, please hit that subscribe button. Also, any comments are appreciated. Thank you.